Good morning. My name is Michel Chosadowski with the Center for Research on Globalization, which is based in Montreal. We have the privilege of welcoming today on our program, which is Analysis and Debate, Richard Gage, which is the founding member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And he will be addressing the 9/11 events from the point of view of an engineer and an architect, with the view also to refuting the official story. And I will take a few minutes just to summarize what the official story was in terms of the events on that day 19 years ago. Because within hours of the attacks, allegedly by Al-Qaeda terrorists, Osama bin Laden was identified as responsible for having launched these attacks. And at 11 o'clock in the morning of September 11, the Bush administration had already announced that Al-Qaeda was responsible for these attacks, and that was done without the conduct of police investigation. CIA Director George Tenet stated that bin Laden had the capacity to plan multiple attacks with little or no warning. And this insertion, as I mentioned, was made spontaneously at about 11 o'clock in the morning, barely 2 hours after the attacks on the World Trade Centers 1 and 2. That same evening, at 9:30 p.m., a war cabinet was formed, integrated by senior officials, intelligence, military advisors, and at 11 o'clock at night, at the end of that historic meeting at the White House, the war on terrorism was officially launched, and Afghanistan was identified as a state sponsor of terrorism. The following morning, on the 12th, at the North Atlantic Council in Brussels, the decision taken by this war cabinet was endorsed by America's allies, namely NATO. And barely 4 weeks later, on the 7th of October, a war was launched on Afghanistan. The public was not informed of the fact, which is known to military analysts, that a large-scale theater war thousands of miles away is never planned and executed in a matter of 4 weeks. In other words, from the 12th of September to the 7th of October. That is the official version that's summarized. There's a lot, of course, a lot more to it, and a lot of analysis has gone into the geopolitics. But the research of Richard Gage and Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is fundamental in refuting that official version of events. Welcome to the program, Richard Gage. Delighted.
Thank you, Michel. Great to be here with you.
So essentially, what is your response to this official agenda?
Well, the official agenda falls on its face, as in addition to the opposing realities that you just pointed out, the collapses of these 3 skyscrapers on 9/11 reveals that this couldn't be Al Qaeda. This is some sort of an inside operation. The collapses of World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 show evidence of explosives and incendiaries. And I'm happy to outline the evidence that the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth have been assembling and talking all around the world in dozens of countries and more than 100 American cities now for 14 years. So that's how I'm here to help.
Now, maybe you can give the timeline. I think there's a distinction between the World Trade Center 1 and 2, and also then, of course, World Trade Center 7, the Solomon building, which was not in the news until several years later when it was discovered that there was a third World Trade Center building which had collapsed. And there's certain features, of course, involved in that. But maybe we could start by addressing World Trade Center 1 and 2, and then perhaps the Pentagon, and then, because the World Trade Center 7 happened in the afternoon, and it wasn't hit by an aircraft.
We're told in the official narrative that the upper part of these twin towers drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. And that's called the column failure theory in NIST terms. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. But we see something completely different, and we know through the laws of physics that when two bodies collide, there's an equal and opposite destructive force, that the upper body would have been destroyed before destroying much at all of the lower body, which is stronger, cold, hard, and intact. And indeed, that's what the photos and videos show in our analysis on our landmark video, 9/11, Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. We're very clear, and all the videos show this, that the upper part of the building, in the case of the North Tower, 15 stories above the point of jet plane impacts, destroys itself. The structure is basically liquefied. It's shattered internally. And that's true for the South Tower, which was hit 30 stories down as well. And then it crumbles. And by the way, all that happens after these first responders, 156 of them as documented now from the oral testimonies by Professor Graham McQueen. They are on record talking about explosions and seeing flashes of light, many of them, before the towers ever collapse, talking about like a train running underneath their feet. And the next thing they know, they look up and the tower is collapsing. But again and again, these witnesses of explosions are documenting the order of events, that explosions occur and flashes of light occur before the collapses. The official story tells us, oh, that must be one floor falling on another that they're hearing. No, this is very, very clear what's going on here. And we can see very clearly after the upper part is destroyed, what happens next is a series of additional explosions, which is hurling 4-ton and 8-ton structural steel sections laterally, landing 600 feet in every direction. And they're hurled at 80 miles an hour. These are actually clocked by physicists. Remember, gravity works how? Down. What's going on here is lateral. So a 1,400-foot diameter around each of these towers is where all the steel is. So how can the steel be crushing the building? This is 1/3 the weight of the building, all of this steel. It's outside the footprint, well outside the footprint. Well, we say, well, gosh, maybe it's the concrete that's crushing the building. Well, let's look at that, because all the photos and the videos show no concrete pancakes laying at the bottom of either of these towers. They show the concrete being pulverized in midair on the way down by what? What can only be high energy explosives of some kind. It's pulverizing this concrete to a fine ash. So there's no concrete visible, extremely little, down at the bottom of either of the aftermath, the piles of these buildings. So if that's another third of the weight of this building. So if 2/3 of the weight of the building is not available to crush the building because that concrete was distributed in a 3 square mile area around lower Manhattan from river to river, 3 inches thick blanket, it's not available to crush the building either. So that's an extraordinary piece of evidence in addition that what's crushing the building? Well, what we see as the building's tearing itself apart is what the videos show, but underneath there's all of these isolated explosive ejections, 20 stories, 40 stories, even 60 stories down below this exploding mass. And they're ejecting at 200 feet per second. This is explosive speeds. So that's not accountable in the official story either, nor is the finding of extreme temperatures in the aftermath of both of the Twin Towers. And that includes the finding of molten iron microspheres, the previously molten, found by the U.S. Geological Survey, doing the most extensive tests of all the World Trade Center dust, and along with R.J. Lee Group, an environmental concern, which has documented these billions of these. It amounts to up to 4 tons of previously molten, meaning extreme heat, 2,800 degrees to melt iron. And it is iron, elemental iron. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. So where did the iron come from? And how did they get into spheres, almost naked to the human eye? Well, yeah.
If I could ask you a question there, because the question is, the official story says it's Al-Qaeda who did it. Now, would Al-Qaeda have the capabilities of undertaking this process of bringing down the buildings through as you have described it? I think that's still, it might be a superficial question, but it is ultimately important, because the official story is that the United States was attacked by a foreign power. They say that in the official documents in Brussels.
Yeah.
And was there any evidence of Afghanistan being involved? Were there any Afghanistani planes in the skies of New York that day?
And all you have to do to answer that question is to look at what was found in addition to that by these 18 international scientific teams studying the dust as well, led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen. Now, they found nanothermite chips, red on one side, gray on the other, dual layered, red-gray, fluid applied with the ingredients of thermite in them, because they zoom in 50,000 times with a nuclear microscope, and they find iron oxide particles and aluminum platelets that are 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair, mixed into this matrix of organic material, which is fascinating because these are incendiaries. Thermite is what's found here. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. But this is very carefully engineered at the nanoscale. When you put it in a heater, it produces what? At 758 degrees Fahrenheit, it produces molten iron microspheres. So the USGS, who couldn't even speculate where all these spheres came from, but which they document as a key component of the dust. It's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has these spheres, which we can't identify where they came from, 4 tons of them. Well, they came from these nanothermite chips, which also amount to about 5 to 6 tons throughout all the World Trade Center dust. So we know where those spheres came from. So this is extremely sophisticated material made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. It's not made in a cave in Afghanistan, Michel.
Well, that's a very important answer. Now, maybe we can turn our attention to Building 7, because there's certain features about Building 7. First of all, it was not struck by an aircraft. There was some fire there, but there are certain, and it was not reported, until several years later. Is that the case?
Well, we saw only one or two instances of it on mainstream media. It was buried. Most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. It should have been the most studied structural failure. After all, no plane hit it. And it's the architects who specify the fireproofing, which this building had. So if there's a problem of the first skyscraper ever collapsing due to fire, we should be all over it like a hyena on a greasy pork chop. So, but no, we didn't even know about it. I didn't get one bulletin from the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm one of 90,000 members. Nothing.
Although, I mean, I think one of the important issues which has been brought out by your analysis and other analysts is the fact that in the afternoon, Building 7 collapsed, but the two reports, one by the BBC and the one by CNN, were actually broadcast the collapse of the building prior to the actual event. Now, there are various interpretations that one can bring to that, but that suggests that the media, at least, or somebody in the media, had foreknowledge that this building was going to collapse, and they announced it before it actually happened.
Yeah, 20 minutes before. And they actually gave the reason why. Jane Stanley standing there in front of the camera announcing the collapse, and there it is right behind her. You can see it hasn't even collapsed yet. So yeah, that's foreknowledge. Also, these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7 in the afternoon of 9/11, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building behind them, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying, "Did you hear that? The building's coming down. The building's going to blow up. Flame and debris coming down. That's why we're moving back." So that's foreknowledge too, right? What were they doing? How did they know? Here's a building, 47 stories skyscraper. You can see it right here. Actually, and in the afternoon of 9/11 at 5:20, after witnesses hear explosions, this building drops like a rock straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. Now, this is at free fall. That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. That looks just like the old hotels in Las Vegas. And buildings can't, what that means, if it's falling at free fall acceleration, not one of those 80 columns in that building gave any resistance for at least a third of this building's 7-second fall. Where did that structure go? Well, maybe those explosions that those witnesses heard can give us a clue. Maybe the extreme temperatures found in the pile of Building 7 after its collapse reveal that this is not just ordinary office fires, which surely would have been put out by the kinetic energy of the collapse and the pressures involved. So no, these temperatures lasted for months in the aftermath of all three skyscrapers. They couldn't put these fires out. Well, thermite has its own source of oxygen. It can even burn underwater.
Richard, I think one of the crucial elements, I think, which you've also raised in your writings, and it's been the object of debate, is that there hasn't been a police investigation, a thorough police investigation into what constitutes, in fact, a crime against the American people, the victims of the attacks, but also the lies and fabrications which are used to justify police state measures at home and the global war on terrorism all over the world, where Al-Qaeda is being, of course, is the target and also the instrument. How do you view that question? Is a police investigation something which is going to happen? And if it's not going to happen, are we not also, should we not also address the issue of the criminalization of justice, the fact that the whole judicial system is paralyzed with regard to this very important event? And on the other hand, the official story still prevails, as far as I know.
Well, it does for a whole lot of people, most people probably. But for millions in the 9/11 truth movement and people who are being woken up by efforts, grand efforts such as yours and mine, and the whole 9/11 truth movement, we have 3,300 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. That's our mission, is to get a real police investigation, and not just one that's, rubber stamped like the Warren Commission was, for instance. I mean, we have the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene. Starting just 2 weeks after 9/11, this steel from World Trade Center 7 and then the Twin Towers was put on a barge, sent to China for recycling before investigators could ever get their hands on it and do a proper investigation. And we're talking steel that has the evidence, according to FEMA, who did the first report that came out in 2002 before NIST got their hands on it and threw it out. They had a metallurgical examination on that steel in Appendix C of the Building Performance Assessment Report in May of 2002, and it shows very clearly hot temperature corrosion attack on the steel. The author, Jonathan Barnett, says the ends of the steel beams were partly evaporated. That takes 4,000 degrees, and that can't be accounted for no way, no how by the official story. They don't even try. The only thing that can account for those temperatures is thermite. And where did the sulfur come from? Sulfur is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. Where did the liquid molten iron come from that they said was invading the steel in this metallurgical examination? Well, that's the byproduct of thermite. So we've got the evidence, Michelle. The question is, how do we get a real investigation? And that's why we have so many legal initiatives, including right now a new inquest into Jeff Campbell's death in the court system in the UK. He was murdered in the 106th floor of the South Tower during this demolition.
Well, I mean, the question really is, because that was 19 years ago that this happened, and we're commemorating these 19 years, and a lot has happened in between. Many countries have been invaded. The whole fabric of US society has changed, the police apparatus, and so on and so forth. And the question is that police investigation feasible without, I mean, because there are very powerful interests involved. And the question is, will the ultimate truth be corroborated by, I presume, by an FBI investigation? And if the FBI is not in a position to do it, it has to be an independent investigation. But then the question is there complicity within the judicial system in postponing those procedures? And are you still hopeful that one day there will be justice for the victims, but also justice for the broader, not only the US public, but worldwide opinion as to who was behind it? Visibly, bin Laden is not responsible. And I should also, I think, mention to our listeners that on the 11th of September 2001, he was at a military hospital. He was receiving treatment at a military hospital in Rawalpindi, which is a military city, headquarters of the Pakistani military. The place is swarming with US military advisors. His whereabouts were known, and he wasn't able to, well, to put it bluntly, he was not able to coordinate those attacks from his laptop in his hospital bed where he was being treated for his, kidneys. That report was confirmed by Dan Rather, reporting from Rawalpindi. It was a Dan Rather CBS News report, and it's on record. So there are other points of evidence that bin Laden was not involved in the 9/11 attacks. We know that. But the more substantive evidence which you put forth, I think, has to lead us into ultimately a bona fide police investigation with the support of the US justice system. Is that possible?
I completely agree. It is possible. We remain very hopeful. We have several legal initiatives to force that to happen. One of them is a grand jury investigation, which we have submitted a petition for in the US court system in Manhattan. And we got a letter back from Jeffrey Berman saying we will comply with the law, requiring us to give this 60 exhibits of evidence to a special grand jury. And we don't have evidence that he's done that, so we filed a mandamus action. So that's in process right now with a new replacement for Jeffrey Berman that I guess Trump appointed. So we'll see how that goes. We've also sued the FBI because they've withheld this evidence that we have given them on several occasions in several different forms, which they've actually responded to. So we know they got it, but they were required to give this to the Congress in the 2015 Congressional Review Commission. And that is a pending action as well. And there's some, they filed a motion to dismiss and so forth. And now I mentioned we've got, we're submitting next month to the Attorney General in the UK. When we've hired the best lawyer in London to do this with $500 an hour. We had to raise $100,000, which we have been successful in doing. So we have a lot of hope here, Michelle. It's not over. I didn't think it would take 14 years when I started. When I was hit by a 2x4 by David Ray Griffin, who's now written 14 books on the subject of 9/11 truth. I heard him on the radio. I was just shocked. I didn't know any of this. I didn't know there was any other alternative theory as to how these towers came down. I was just rooting for Colin Powell as he was making his irrefutable case for weapons of mass destruction against Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, which you didn't even mention Iraq, right? I mean, that's an obvious, everybody knows we were lied to about invading Iraq. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow too.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. I think there's still a lot more to be done, but what you underscore with regard to the truth is an important message, because the truth is a powerful and peaceful weapon. And what is occurring and what has been occurring since 9/11 is that gradually the lie becomes the truth. The lie becomes the truth, and that we get on the media every day. And I think when the lie becomes the truth, there's no moving backwards. And consequently, we have to continue the battle for 9/11 truth, and also rely on a judicial system which is committed to truthful police investigation. Thank you very much. There's obviously follow-up on this important issue in the course of the work that we're undertaking, both the 9/11, I should say the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is led by Richard Gage, and we also globalresearch.ca. Our website is globalresearch.ca. In French, it is called mondialisation.ca, and in Spanish, globalizacion.ca. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michel.
For research on globalization depends on your support. To make a donation or purchase a book or DVD, please visit globalresearch.ca and click Donate on the menu bar.